What would you say is the greatest era for the Batman comics? If you ask me, I would say it was the Bronze Age, because it defined Batman as the Dark Knight. There are way too many good stories from that era, but I've put together this list of the 10 greatest Bronze Age Batman stories that, once you read them, will help you understand why Batman was just so good back then. We kickstart this list with The Secret of the Waiting Graves, the story that kickstarted the Bronze Age of Batman. This 1970s story was published in Detective Comics 395, and it's the first Batman story by the legendary Denny O'Neil, and also his first collaboration with artist Neil Adams. The two of them are among the greatest Batman creative teams of all time, and we're going to see a lot more of them on this list. The Secret of the Waiting Graves was the story that erased the campy comedy of the Silver Age and returned Batman to the dark and mysterious creature he was always meant to be. A significant and historically important story, and that's why you should definitely give it a shot. At number 9 we have Small War of the Super Rifles, a 1976 story from the Brave and the Bold 124, in which Batman teams up with Sergeant Rock. Batman teamed up with almost every major DC character in the Brave and the Bold, but this one is the greatest of those team-ups because of the creative team involved. Bob Haney was the writer of almost every Brave and the Bold comic, and Jim Aparo, the legendary Batman artist, began his career illustrating Batman in the Brave and the Bold. So imagine the absolute bonkers experience that is reading a story in which Jim Aparo and Bob Haney work together to help Batman and Sergeant Rock. This is a one-of-a-kind comic book in which the writer and the artist are part of the story, and it makes for a thrilling adventure that blends fiction with reality while telling a very entertaining story. It's obvious they had a lot of fun coming up with this one, and I can guarantee that you will have fun reading it. Coming up at number 8 we have the Saga of Nocturna. One of the most mysterious and intriguing characters of the Bronze Age, Nocturna was created by writer Doug Moench and artist Don Newton. Her real name was Natalia Knight, and there's something about that last name that makes me love her even more. Nocturna was the most prominent character during Doug Moench's first run in Batman, between 1983 and 1986, but because self-contained storylines were not very common back then, her saga is actually spread across multiple issues of Batman and Detective Comics. Nocturna was first introduced in a 3-issue storyline, where she was a straight-up villain. Her second storyline was an 11-issue adventure, in which she adopted Jason Todd for her own interests, but she ended up becoming an anti-hero and romantic partner for Batman. Nocturna's third and final storyline was a 5-issue crossover during the events of the Crisis on Infinite Earths. All in all, Nocturna was a unique character that brought much elegance, mystery and seduction to the Batman comics. I highly recommend you to read the whole saga. All the issues of the story in reading order are down in the description, so be sure to check it out. At number 7 we have The House That Haunted Batman. This 1971 story was published in Detective Comics 408, and it's the prime example of the horror stories that dominated the early years of the Bronze Age. This was the first Batman story written by Marv Wolfman and Len Wein, two young writers who would later become legends of the comic book industry. The art was done by Neil Adams, who was the best Batman artist in the early 1970s, and his work really shines in this dark and twisted tale of horrors. The House That Haunted Batman is a phenomenal story that perfectly illustrates why Batman and horror go hand in hand. One story that you definitely need to read, if you dare. Coming next at number 6 is the Bat Murderer Saga, a 5-issue storyline from issues 444 to 448 of Detective Comics. This 1975 storyline was written by Len Wein with art by Jim Aparo and Ernie Chan. In this one, Batman becomes a wanted criminal as he is framed for the murder of Talia. As he tries to clear his name, Batman comes across the Creeper, and they work together to solve the mystery. The Bat Murderer Saga is the best and most iconic example of the detective type of adventures that were common back in the Bronze Age, and it makes of this one a story that you can't miss. The number 5 spot on this list goes to a story called There Is No Hope in Crime Alley, which was published in Detective Comics 457. This 1976 story was written by Denny O'Neil and illustrated by Dick Giordano, and it's notable for creating Leslie Thompkins, the woman who took care of young Bruce Wayne after his parents were murdered. However, the most notable event from this story is the first introduction to Crime Alley, the place where Batman was born. Prior to this story, the place where the Waynes were killed had no name. It was just a random street of Gotham. But that changed thanks to Denny O'Neil in this story, and ever since then, Crime Alley has become one of the most iconic places in the Batman mythos. At number 4 we have Night of the Stalker, a 1974 story published in Detective Comics 439. I think that if a person has to read one, and only one Batman story, then this should be the one. The story was written by Steve Englehart and illustrated by Sala Mendola, and it's, in my opinion, one of the greatest Batman stories of all time. Night of the Stalker takes the best elements of the Batman mythos and creates an awesome story. The poetic narrations and the dark atmosphere manage to capture the heart and soul of Batman. In the story, Batman doesn't say a single word, which is ironic considering I'm at a loss for words trying to describe this amazing story. I guess that what I'm trying to say is that this is the one Batman story that you should definitely read. The Joker's 5-Way Revenge takes the number 3 spot on this list. Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams created this story in 1973, which was published in Batman 251. The idea was to bring back the Joker and return him to his darker, more sinister version from the early years of the Golden Age. This new-old approach to the Joker changed the character forever and returned him to his former glory as the Batman's greatest enemy. This story single-handedly revived the idea of Batman's classic villains as very real and dangerous threats. It was thanks to this story that every other Batman villain was brought back and given darker, more serious characterizations. It was also thanks to this story that the idea for Arkham Asylum was first created. The Joker's 5-Way Revenge is not only one of the most important comics in the history of Batman, it's also a great story, full of iconic moments that showcase just how great Batman was in the Bronze Age. Number 2 goes to the Saga of the Demon. As far as new villains of the Bronze Age, there is absolutely no other character that comes close to Ra's al Ghul. He was created by Julius Schwartz, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams in 1971, and his introduction was the first long storyline in the history of Batman. The Saga of the Demon was 11 issues long, in which new characters and situations were slowly introduced. The League of Assassins, Talia, Ra's al Ghul, Matches Malone and the Lazarus Pit were all created during this storyline, which culminated in an epic, swashbuckling climax, one that Batman had never seen before, and one that has never been replicated. The Saga of the Demon, which was published between 1970 and 1972, has been partially reprinted in multiple occasions on different modern publications, but if you want the first-hand experience, I'd recommend reading the single issues separately, and I will also leave the reading order of that saga down in the description. And finally, the greatest Batman story from the Bronze Age that you must read is Batman: Strange Apparitions. The year was 1977, and writer Steve Englehart started his Batman run in Detective Comics. His goal was to create the definitive version of Batman, and without a doubt, he succeeded. Englehart's run lasted for 8 issues, starting in Detective Comics 469 and ending with issue 476. The first 2 issues were illustrated by Walt Simonson, but the remaining 6 issues were illustrated by Marshall Rogers. This creative team is largely responsible for the success of the story, as both writer and artist shared the same vision of the definitive Batman. Strange Apparitions was groundbreaking as the first self-contained long storyline, much before that kind of stories became popular in the Batman books. The story is excellent in every area, from an outstanding characterization to phenomenal art and a great cast of characters. This storyline is the absolute best Batman story from the Bronze Age. As you probably guessed, Strange Apparitions is one of my favorite Batman stories, and I already made a video about it, so maybe go check it out. And that's going to make it for this video. Hopefully you found some new Batman stories to read, and maybe now you understand why I think the Bronze Age of Batman was just so good. If you have any other suggestions, leave them down in the comments, and I will see you all in the next one. As always, take care and thanks for watching.